Hello again, everyone. This time I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sustainable farming. I did some research on a farm in Virginia, in Swope, Virginia. It's near Winchester and Staunton, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Mountains. A really nice place. These guys, this is Joel Salatin's farm, and I posted a lot of things for you to read about and look at videos about Joel Salatin. So I hope you've done that so you have something what's going on. Uh, on the screen here, you see a friend of mine, also another animal I've done research on. This is Argiope aurantia, the golden garden spider. And maybe you guys have seen this lovely lady mostly in the late summer, early fall when she's up in her web. So without further ado, let's see and talk about sustainable grazing. This is a place, Polyface Farms is a place where um, if you ask Joel Salatin, he says, what do you raise on your farm? He says, I raise grass because everything on his farm is grass fed. Therefore, it is solar powered. This is some research I did with a graduate student of mine, Tim Bancroft, a while ago. And we'll talk about what happens at Polyface. First of all, a little bit about sustainable agriculture. Sustainable agriculture uses practices that help to preserve and conserve the soil structure and composition. And as you've been reading, soil is very important. If you don't have good soil, you won't have crops. Also, you want to maintain the hydrology. You want to keep the water relationships. You want to keep water in the soil. You want to keep water moving through the soil. You want to have it available to the plants. Also, being sustainable means that you promote the regeneration of the vegetation that's there so that it can be continuously growing. You just don't crop it and then it all goes away. Also, the other thing you want to do is try to reduce energy inputs, and you do that by reducing fertilizer and pesticide because, as you know, they take a lot of energy to make fertilizer and pesticides and to apply them. And what you try to do is use natural systems wherever possible. And this is one thing that Joel Salatin tries to do, is tries to mimic natural systems. And the other thing you can do to help sustainable agriculture is to promote local food systems. And you saw there was a lot of websites that I posted there for you to look at that talked about local food systems. So let's talk about sustainable methods. They've been used for fruits like in orchards and flowers and other sorts of things for quite a while, but they're usually not used for meat, like for cattle or for poultry or for swine. And generally, those are grown in place, they're placed on pastures or they're put into feedlots afterwards. These feedlots are also called CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. They're fed grains or sometimes animal byproducts. And these then are what are used to feed these cattle in one place. It's a very inefficient use of resources and energy. And it transforms, well, this is something about the fats. Omega-3s are good for you, omega-6s are not. Guess what? Corn has omega-6s. So that you guys are all transformed from omega-3s to omega-6 fatty acids in your cell membranes. And we can go into that later. Okay, conventional pasturing is where you put hundreds and hundreds of head on multiple acres during multiple months. The cattle can roam around freely, but they selectively graze on the best forage plants. They ignore the ones they don't like, they eat the best things. So pretty soon, guess what's left? Only the bad things. This degrades the vegetation, the soil, and the plant community because the plants are eaten down to the soil level. When they eat them way down to the soil level like that, you get poor regrowth. Plus, the cattle are always in one place, so you get soil compaction, which means water doesn't infiltrate very well. And then again, I said before, the less desirable plants remain after grazing. This is what an overgrazed field looks like. Those less desirable plants become dominant, and this creates poor quality grazing. However, at Polyface Farms, they do non-conventional sustainable grazing. What they do is he puts the cattle on one small area, but only for one day. So he rotates about 80 cattle on 1 hectare, which is about 2 acres, for one day. Then he moves them on to the next. How this works is he has here a electric fence around the outside, and he has the water all on the inside here. And then he has 2 electric fences. So here's day 1, the cattle are all here. Then the next day he moves the fence and the cattle all move here. And the next day he moves the fence and the cattle all move here. And the cattle all move here. And so on and so forth until they go around the racetrack. It takes about 60 days to make the entire circuit. By the time they come around, you've got the grass regrowth because the cattle aren't given enough time to eat the grass all the way to the ground. They're forced to eat everything. This is what it looks like before, and this is what it looks like after. Because the cows know if they don't eat everything, they're not going to get a lot to eat. So they're not so selective. That means that they eat the bad stuff, the good stuff, everything. But they don't eat it all the way down. And this actually mimics large herds of grazers, just like on the plains of the Serengeti. So that means the grasses aren't eaten all the way down to ground level. Little tufts are left, which means they grow back faster. And this has been shown through research. If you only crop it down that far, it grows back faster in the equal amount of time. That's what this is all about. So this is what it looks like. A field looks like about 30 days after grazing. You saw what it looked like before. This is what it looks like after 30 days of grazing. So you can see the grass grows back very nicely. Well, how does that happen? And this is the beauty of sustainable grazing, because this grazing by the cows is accompanied by deposition of what Joel calls nitrogen-rich semi-converted lignified plant biomass, commonly known as cow pies. And usually there's a nicely formed cow pie. Now, Joel leaves those cow pies on the field. You can see let them dry a little bit, let the decomposer see there's a beetle burrowing into it, and they're allowed, as he says, to ripen for about 3 days. They accumulate decomposers. Then after about 3 days, he moves in what he calls his manure spreaders. And this is approximately 400 hens in this mobile chicken coop here. He calls it his egg mobile. And they live in there, and he moves this into the area, and these chickens then spread out from the chicken coop, moving around, and then they forage in the pasture, scattering the cow pies. They scratch in the cow pies and scatter them around when they're looking for the bugs. And this helps to spread the manure, and they also add their own brand of fertilizer, and I'll tell you what, those chickens make some pretty good eggs. They're the best eggs you'll ever going to have. So that's how Joel Salatin does his conventional grazing, or his non-conventional grazing, in order to keep it in a sustainable way. I went out there with my grad student. We did some sampling to see what the arthropod communities were before and after here. We're putting out our sample unit. Then we go in, and in that ring, we vacuum up all the bugs that we can get and put them in a bag. Then we go in, see, using a suction. We have a screen in there, and we suction them up. We take a look, and then we go in, and we call it scorched earth sampling. We go in and we sample every single arthropod in there, and by cutting down the vegetation and everything like that. And so this is what it looks like before grazing, and then after chicken and cattle have been through. And then we also sampled the conventional fields. This is a conventionally grazed field that was right next door. And what we found is that this is what the arthropod diversity looked like before the cows. This is what the arthropod diversity looked like after the cows. And this is what it looked like. Whoops, got to go back. This is what it looked like after the chickens. The chickens really eat a lot. But if you notice, the proportions here are about the same as they were here. This is a conventional field, and the diversity in the conventional fields were a lot lower. If we look at species diversity here in the conventional field, it's lower than even after the chickens. Even after the chickens went through, the species diversity is still higher than that in the conventional field, the richness too. This brings up something about farming and how it's really not sustainable the way we do it now. If you look, farming uses machines and seed and tilling and fertilizer and irrigation and pesticides. This all takes fossil fuels. Now, if you take the fossil fuels to do all this, add a little sun, you get a crop. Now, you have to harvest that crop, and to harvest that crop, it requires fossil fuels to do the harvesting. Then once you do the harvesting, you have to transport it to the processing plant. And that processing plant then uses fossil fuels to do that transport, and the processing, and then that goes to us. And what we do is we make an industrial output. We make the farms, the farming machines, and the fertilizer, and the irrigation machines, and the pumps, and the pesticides, and that all takes fossil fuels. I think maybe you've noticed a trend here. Fossil fuels to grow the crop, fossil fuels to harvest the crop, fossil fuels to process and transport, and fossil fuels to make the machines so we can make it. The problem is that fossil fuels are going to run out. There's a limited number on the planet. And when we run out of fossil fuels, what happens is we're all gonna die. And that's unfortunate, but unless we find another way of farming. This is why when I talked about sustainable cultures earlier on, we talked about how the agrarian society tended to be a lot more sustainable. And the reason for that is because it's solar powered. The food system that we have now is all powered by fossil fuels. And the trouble is that's linear. We're not using recycling like we need to. And this is what has to happen if we're going to become sustainable again. So I hope you've enjoyed talking about Polyface Farms, and you go back and take a look at Joel Salatin's things and see what he has to say. He's a pretty outspoken guy and a pretty interesting person. So if you have any questions, please email me as always, and we'll be back soon. Thank you.